Mated to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 62. Kidnap. The journey wasn't a long one for Damon. It didn't feel that way at all, but it was in fact 2 hours since he had been running through the woods on all fours. The distance probably didn't bother him because of how pumped he had become after his talk with Sarah. She was finally coming around, and all he needed to do now was to get this over with so he could patch things up properly. It was also a huge relief that he'd soon have absolutely nothing to do with Katie. All she had ever been was a wormhole in his life, even now. Besides, not having her around was better for Sarah since there would be no room for misunderstandings anymore. Damon shook his huge wolf form as he finally set his thoughts aside and skidded to a stop once he reached the spot where a vibrant red cloth was tied to a tree. This was it, the spot where he was supposed to rendezvous with those stupid hunters. Yet for some reason, he couldn't hear, smell, nor see them. His face contorted suspiciously. What kind of game were they playing? How dare they mess with an Alpha King? When Jason suggested partnership between two species that had been against each other for ages, he wasn't very supportive of the idea. But they were battling with beings as cunning as rogues, and as such, he admitted that it was a good idea to partner up with the hunters, despite loathing every bone in their bodies. But as a person of such high status, Damon was determined not to initiate their alliance. But a few days after his confrontation with their leader Kevin Mark at the mall, he had sent some of his goons to request for an alliance, with the purpose of eliminating the rogues plaguing this area. It was definitely a surprise, since they both weren't very fond of each other, and at the time, he thought nothing of it. But now he was getting the idea that leaving his pack stranded in the middle of their plans was Kevin's form of revenge. But no matter, this all worked out in his favor. A weak human like him was useless anyway. His help would probably be as insignificant as a fly's. However, deceiving him was something that he would not forgive anyone for. After this battle, he'd definitely have his head. Whether it cause a war or not, he didn't care. Without any further delay, he took off once again, and with a loud roar, he prompted the others to follow his lead. This time, it took around half an hour for him to reach his final destination, the hideout. He pulled to a stop in a spot where he was far enough to not be scented nor spotted, but close enough for him to be able to search the premises with his eyes. Alpha. Gilbert came to stand beside him as he began to change back into human form. There are bodies. I can see that, Damon grumbled, his words sounding animalistic as he was still in the middle of shifting. Stay back until I scout the area. But Alpha, I said stay back, he hissed, irritation clouding his voice. He was already annoyed about Kevin's behavior, so his bad mood had derived mostly from that, and now he was itching with the need to ram his fist into someone's jaw. Certainly if Gilbert hadn't stepped back out of reverence, he would have surely gotten a piece of his anger. Keep everyone else in check until I return. Gilbert nodded, retreating back under the cloaks of the dark forest while Damon moved out into the open. The place looked deserted aside from the dozens of bodies that littered the ground, and he could even smell the scent of his own werewolves, the wolves from his pack that was sent to keep sight of their enemies' movements. They had all been killed, and that was the very reason why he had lost all contact with them. This was certainly an unfortunate sight. These rogues lessened his army, and it was not just any low-ranked wolves, but some of the best he had in his arsenal. For that, they definitely pay with their lives. Alpha, you're here, a male voice acknowledged. Damon quickly spun around in his direction. He was a blonde with thick eyebrows and fierce-looking eyes. Damon recognized him at first sight, Kevin's right-hand man. Yet behind him, around 4 dozen other hunters stood at attention, each looking equally as fierce and stoic as he was. But Damon wasn't intimidated one bit. If anyone was to feel scared right now, it'd be them. How dare they all provoke him to anger? Why did you all hide your scent? Damon glanced over his shoulder to look at the men behind him. They immediately shuffled uncomfortably in their spot, trying hard not to meet his icy gaze. Perhaps they weren't as fierce as he initially thought. It is protocol to hide our scents when approaching the enemy. I apologize if it caused any inconvenience. He bowed his head a bit and lowered his gaze. His actions only made Damon's jaw tick in anger. I see. He cracked his neck and curled his fingers like that of claws as his nails elongated. Someone who saw it could tell that he was about to unleash his impending anger, and all the hunters could do was step back. Who told you to desert the meeting spot? I thought I made myself clear when I said we were at the designated spot, but we'd had to move. He didn't get to finish his sentence because a large, callous hand stopped his windpipe, inciting gasps from his men behind him. You! Damon bared his teeth, his fingers tightening around his neck. Dare to cut me off? He hissed. I apologize. The blonde's words barely managed to creep up his throat, but an apology with no sign of regret only made Damon's anger multiply. We heard howls coming from a distance. At that, Damon craned his neck as a newfound interest suddenly sparked within him, and reluctantly, he slackened his taut hold on his neck. Go on. We headed— He paused shortly to cough. For the hideout ahead of time, but unfortunately, when we arrived the wolves were already dead. Rogues came out in their numbers, so we were at a disadvantage. They ended up killing a couple of our men as well before retreating into the woods. It seemed like they were in a hurry. In what direction? East. Damon studied his face for any form of lying and pushed him to the side when he found none whatsoever. Gilbert, he called to the werewolf he left in charge of the others. Let's move. We're heading east. In an instant, Gilbert was standing right behind him, face as hard as a rock. Are you sure you want to believe these humans? I don't trust them. He spoke low enough for only Damon to hear. If that's the case, all we have to do is kill them, Damon replied casually. You! He pointed to the blonde. I'll take your leader's absence as a form of disrespect. After this, he better be ready to have his head separated from his body. He nodded. I'll have him know your intentions. Anyway, I want you and your men under my tail. Gilbert, you lead the others and make sure no one falls behind. Understood. Gilbert took a few steps back. All right, let's go. Damon was about to lurch forward and shift in midair, but before he could, a sudden mind link came knocking at his consciousness. Alpha! That frightened call was from no one but Jason. There were only 2 times when Jason has ever called him Alpha. It was either he was in an exceedingly good mood, or he had done something that he knew for sure would anger him. In this case, it was definitely the latter, and that realization made him stiffen in place. Swallowing the saliva that had accumulated in his mouth, Damon quickly fired back a reply. What is it? Forgive me, Alpha, but she has been kidnapped. I'm trying to track her, but there isn't any trace of her scent. Damon didn't have time to get angry in this case. The only thing that creeped up his spine was fear. The same raw fear that devoured Jason was the same one that devoured Damon. It had been a very long while since he had felt so much fear surge within him, and it wasn't a good feeling. Gilbert, we are heading back at full speed. He spun around and was ready to take off, but a hand suddenly grasped his left shoulder. "I'm sorry, but we can't allow you to leave," the blonde said nonchalantly, his fingers tightening against his skin. "You're ruining our plans." Damon didn't even bother to turn his head to look at him. He simply reeled his hand back and slammed it against his neck, detaching his head from his body. As blood splattered all over his clothes and the limp body dropped to the floor, the measly hunters the blonde brought with him cowardly took a few steps back. "I'll take care of the traitors." Gilbert marched up until he was standing before the hunters, back straight and hands ready to rip through whatever stood in his way. "I need Blaze, Seraph, and Flip to assist. We will catch up with you, Alpha." Damon nodded as he flicked his hand in an attempt to get rid of the blood. "I want at least one of them alive. And get the wolves on standby ready for battle, including those from the west, north, and south. I need every single warrior wolf at my disposal." And with that, he took into the woods with over 300 wolves thundering behind him. Gilbert had evolved over the years into one of the best betas around, and there was no doubt that he'd get the job done. So now, the only person he needed to worry about was his mate, Sarah. When Sarah awoke, she was draped over a bulky male's shoulder. She had no idea who he was, nor where they were going, but she had enough sense to keep herself still the best she could. "So where's Kevin?" That was indisputably Katie's voice. "He's waiting at the warehouse," the bulky man said gruffly. "Just so you know, if you dare to betray me, I'll kill both you and her on the spot." She tightened her fingers around the bow she was carrying. "And he won't get his precious woman." "There's no need to deceive an ally. We're almost there anyway." "Fine." She looked back at him. "But why does he want her so much anyway? She's Damon's mate, for crying out loud." "That's none of your business," he rumbled. "Your task was to capture her, nothing more." Katie scoffed. "So don't I deserve to know why the Alpha King's mate is so important to a hunter? I'm the one who risked my life to get her." Sarah curled her fingers into a fist, tears springing at her eyes. "Hunter? She couldn't be talking about that Kevin, right? He looked and behaved like a maniac the last time she met him, but he wouldn't do this to her." Though the memories weren't all there, she was still pretty sure that they were good friends. So why on earth would he capture her? What was her purpose, and what exactly was he trying to accomplish? "I don't know either," the man sighed, stopping in his tracks so he could glare at her. "Just keep your nose out of his business if you want to stay alive. You get that Alpha and he gets the girl. That's all there is to it." "Whatever." She flipped her black hair. "Let's hurry before Damon finds out. We've hidden our scents, but we still need to make sure we don't leave any tracks. I'm telling you that it won't be pretty if he reaches us before we reach Kevin. He's probably on our trail right now." Sarah seconded that. If Damon was all right, then he was definitely hunting for her. But if she had heard correctly, then they had hidden both hers and their scents, though she had no idea how exactly. So how on earth would he be able to find her? How would he save her when she was in this state? She stayed still against the hunter, as her hope constantly drained the farther they got. "Ow!" Katie's screech suddenly filled the air after a few silent minutes. The hunter spared her an annoyed glance as she pulled to a stop in front of him. "What is it?" "It's just a scrape. Luckily, it isn't bleeding." Those last few words sprang forth an idea into her Sarah's mind the second she heard it. Slowly, she drew her hand to her lips and took a hard bite out of her skin, rapturing it. She squeezed her eyes shut at the pain that enveloped her as blood started to leak from the wound, dripping off her hand and to the forest floor. This was the least she could do to up her chances of surviving. Mated to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 63. Finding Sarah. Damon pulled to a stop at the edge of the forest and quickly shifted back to human form. The hundreds of wolves behind him followed his actions, their thunderous paws ceasing to trample upon the grassy ground. "Where is my mate?" The booming voice of Damon surged through the crowd and then shook the mighty forest, frightening animals to the point where they hid as fast as lightning, while birds took off into the skies. If mere words were as ruffling as that, then imagine how terrifying it was for the person it was directed at. Jason, who was waiting by the front door, dropped to his knees and lowered his head in shame as soon as the words shook his eardrums. He hesitated for a second when Damon took his first threatening step towards him. "I still haven't found her." Jason knew very well that this was no simple matter, and he knew that he'd be given no simple punishment either. Even if it wouldn't be death, it'd still be dreadful. But it was his mistake for letting his guard down. He should have protected his Luna at all costs, yet he allowed himself to fall victim to Katie's tricks. He deserved whatever was coming to him. "I've searched all the surrounding areas," he continued to explain, "but I still haven't found any trace of her scent, and it's been over a half hour. They're probably far gone." At that, Damon's veins started to spasm as he strided forward, his arms flexing dangerously as his anger multiplied threefold. "Far gone? I told you to keep track of her every movement. How the fuck did you let them take her while you're still untouched?" "I'm sorry, Alpha." He could tell that Damon was close enough to do his worst, and that made a series of apologies split from his lips. "Forgive me, Alpha." As he stared downwards, his eyes caught sight of Damon's shadow reflecting on the ground. From it, he could tell that Damon had raised his claws, and soon it probably hit. "I didn't think that you'd spike the juice." The speed of his words were faster than ever due to desperation. If Damon wasn't listening keenly, then he probably wouldn't have heard him properly. "Sarah wanted me to give her a chance, but I still should have been more careful." As soon as he finished his words untouched, he took the risk of cautiously looking up at him. And when he saw that he had dropped his hand, he breathed a sigh of relief. "Her?" Damon asked. "Katie. She's colluding with the rogues," he informed, finally straightening himself up. "I also smelled the scent of a human before I blacked out. He's most likely a hunter. It's too soon to say they are working together, but hunters are the only source she'd be able to acquire a drug capable of affecting werewolves." Curses sprewed from Damon's mouth at the revelation, and he balled his fist until his nails pierced through his palm. This time around, there'd be no mercy. This time around, she'd die by his hands. "Alpha, I got info on the rogues from the hunters." Gilbert's voice popped into his mind again, and it doesn't sound good. Damon gestured with his hand for Jason to get up before he turned away from him and focused on his conversation with Gilbert. "What did you find out?" "They have reinforcements coming in from all directions, including hunters, and they've also been invading as many packs as they can on their way. I've already gathered the remaining wolves and will be arriving at your residence within a few minutes. However, their army might still be a little more than ours, considering that hunters are working with them as well. So even if you find wherever they are hiding, I suggest not leaving until we arrive. We don't know what we'll be diving into." Damon ran a hand through his hair and harshly gripped the messy strands, almost pulling them from his scalp. "How much?" he gritted out. "We don't have exact numbers. If everyone's unharmed, hurry up and get here. I want to move out as soon as I find any leads." "Yes, Alpha." "Jason!" Damon called out to him, and Jason quickly moved the spot beside him. Split them up and search the whole perimeter. We need to find her as soon as possible. On it! Jason took off towards the army of wolves while Damon took it upon himself to start his own individual search. No matter what it took, he'd find her. Then, he'd rip out the hearts of whoever dared to touch her. An hour into the search, when even Jason was certain that they'd never find her, Damon was still on the hunt. He was both desperate and determined. He'd find her, no matter what it took. Alpha! A female she-wolf ran towards him at lightning speed, her chest heaving as she panted. She stopped a few feet away from him with one hand on her knees and the other holding a nearby tree. Damon paused his search, turned his almost lifeless eyes to her, and scowled. He's pretty sure that she had nothing relevant to tell him, just like the other wolves who had constantly came to him with foolish assumptions and nothing of help. Up to now, his irritation had built high enough for him to smash her face in if she dared to tell him anything he didn't want to hear. What? I found a trail of blood, she informed a little too enthusiastically. We think it belongs to the Luna. His eyes instantly widened. Blood. 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 If it belonged to Sarah, then that would mean that she was hurt, or probably even... Damon shook his head to rid himself of such a heart-wrenching thought. They wouldn't dare to hurt her. They wouldn't. They definitely wouldn't. But no matter how much he tried to convince himself, a part of him was almost sure that it was hers. Even when there was no evidence of it, he needed to find her. Fast. He clenched his tightening chest with his hands and moved to take off. But Jason's saddened voice made him pause. We aren't certain it belongs to Sarah, he told him. It could be Katie's. And what if it isn't? Should I just stay put until Maxim comes to confirm it? Jason sighed. Then we should at least wait until Gilbert gets here with the others. Damon shook his head in an instant. No, we'll follow the trail now. She could be... He gulped in dread, his frantic eyes searching the woods uneasily. In danger as we speak. Hurry up and gather the others. Without another word, he shifted on spot and sped off into the distance, following the lead of the she-wolf. Mated to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 64. Big News. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, and all that she could see was complete and utter darkness. Ignoring the pain that scourged her hand, she twisted around onto her stomach and climbed to her feet. Her beady blue eyes surveyed her surrounding, looking and searching for any source of light. When her eyes pinned on the streak of light escaping through the crack on the wall to her left, she quickly sped over to it. But in the process, her gaze met the unclear sight of splattered blood on the untiled floor. She squinted as her trembling legs slowly turned in that direction. Though she couldn't see very well, she could make out numbers carved into the floor beside the stale blood. 3 familiar numbers. 154. How could she not have remembered the same numbers that were burned into the side of her neck? And this place, it was the dungeon that she had been kept in all those years. Or at least what remained of it. Why did they bring her here? Why here of all places? Was this to prevent Damon from finding her? Surely, if he already found out that she had been kidnapped, then he wouldn't even think of showing up to this place. That was definitely their intent. If I recall correctly, this is the cell you had been kept in. A male voice resounded through the darkness, catching Sarah's utmost attention. She turned towards the voice and squinted repeatedly in an attempt to see through the darkness, and just then, the light was suddenly switched on, giving view of the man that was standing before her cell. Kevin. So this was all you? Sarah acknowledged bitterly as she swiftly hid her wounded hand behind her and drew closer to the wall furthest away from him. Yes, all me. He grinned as if what he had done was some great achievement. I hear your mate's going haywire looking for you. I guess he was actually a bit fond of you. Why are you doing this? Sarah asked pathetically. She was desperate for answers, but no matter how much she rattled her brain, she just couldn't come up with an answer. Yes, he was obviously sort of obsessed with her, but that couldn't be the reason for all this, could it? Deceiving Damon and most likely leading him into an ambush, sending in Katie to provoke both her and him, and lastly, kidnapping her. All of that for her? She was too little of a reason to do so much, right? I thought you already knew that all I want is you, he laughed. And maybe Damon's throne as a bonus. We were meant to be together, Sarah. Fate brought us back to each other. Sarah narrowed her eyes at the load of bull he had just vomited out a while ago. So this was seriously all for her? Her? Where's Damon? What do you plan to do with him? The fear in Sarah's voice made him cackle like a maniac. You're asking one stupid question after another, Sarah. Obviously, I'm going to follow in my mentor's footsteps. Your mentor? It's sad that he won't get to see me accomplish what he wanted for years, he replied, his words lumping in even more confusion into Sarah's mind. The annihilation of his own brother. I'm certain Damon can't possibly survive another rejection. His last sentence made Sarah's eyes spark with realization. Felix? And then it took another few seconds for every piece of the puzzle to finally fit in place. You want me to reject him, so you'll be able to kill him? Her eyes widened as she eased off the wall and looked at him in an incredulous manner, her heartbeat quickening its pace in utter fear. Is that why you brought me here? Precisely. You'll reject him, and I'll do the killing. Then there'll be no one between us. You can be my queen, he smiled, shifting on the stool he had been sitting on. Sarah's face drained of color as her mind clouded with dread. No, she whispered under her breath. She was mostly speaking to herself rather than to him. I won't reject him. I won't. She clenched her fingers against the front of her dress and dropped her head as tears sprung at her eyes. Why is everyone trying to get rid of him when he's not that bad of a person? He's just this way because he's pressured with everything he has to do. I promise that if you let us be, I'll make sure he doesn't hurt you. I just need to convince him that you're simply worried about me and that's it. Sniffling briefly, she swiped away the tears that threatened to trickle over her lips. So let's just end this here. I've come this far, and you'll think I'll end this? His cackling started up again. But this time it was brief. A second afterwards, his face was completely void of all emotion. He then hopped off his stool and grabbed the silver bars in a taut hold. And did you ever hear me say that you had a choice? You are mine. Mine! I met you first. Sarah was quick to deny his claims. You're not my mate. Damon is. Mate? His eyes dropped in a lifeless way, and his hands slowly slid off the bars. You are mine, he declared firmly. You are mine. I own you. I'm not a property that anyone can claim anymore. Sarah blubbered out in a piercing scream. She was getting tired of being trapped in this cell all over again, and she was tired of him. I choose who I want to be with, and it's not you. I know we've known each other for years, but let's live our separate lives now. I don't want you, and I don't want this. Bring me back, and stop making things difficult for the both of us. So you don't want anything to do with me, and you also won't reject him? He didn't raise his head, and that gave Sarah the creeps. He simply kept on speaking in that same threatening manner. frightening her to the bone. "I think I've been too easy on you, Sarah," he chuckled, finally raising his head. Sarah took the chance to take a good look at his face and instantly knew that shit was about to go down. He definitely was giving her the same gaze that Mr. Knack did when he was about to beat the life out of her. "Fine, then killing you will also do the trick." He looked at her from under his lashes maliciously. "Maxim, how about you teach her how to behave?" Sarah's eyes bulged out of their sockets when out of nowhere a familiar man walked up into her line of vision. Her knees buckled under her and she fell to the floor, curling herself into a ball as she tried to push impossibly closer to the wall. "I see you remember my face very well," the red-eyed man said, grinning from ear to ear. "I'm quite grateful to you for allowing me to escape that maniac's clutches. Who knows what he would have done to me?" Sarah didn't reply. Instead, she stayed as quiet as a mouse as she drowned in nothing but fear and turmoil. "Too bad. I'll have to return the favor by breaking a few bones. You see, we need you to do your job, because otherwise we'll have to kill you. And your precious boyfriend over here doesn't want that." He fished a key out of his left pocket and rammed it into the keyhole as an enthusiastic laugh bubbled up his throat. "Let's get to it, shall we?" He pulled the cell open and took his first step inside. Sarah wanted to shrink and disappear in that moment. She knew what was about to come, but she didn't want it. She wanted to get out of this place and live her life now that it was finally getting better. But no, fate had other plans for her. This was the plan: to have her die by the hands of such vicious people who don't even know right from wrong. She lowered her head as waves after waves of tears descended over her cheeks. "Now it—" Maxim suddenly stopped in his tracks and began sniffing the air with a scrunched-up nose. "What's this?" Sarah sat up straighter against the floor and her eyes refilled with hope. She was sure that he probably smelled Damon approaching. She was sure that she was about to get herself out of this mess, and she was sure that she was about to get rescued. But she was wrong. Dead wrong. "What is it?" Kevin gritted his teeth. "I thought I told you to—" "It looks like—" Maxim looked down at Sarah and grinned. "She's pregnant." Mated to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 65. Choices. Boom, boom, boom. Damon's paws hitting against the ground was more dangerous and thunderous than all else. The strength of each thrust forward was more immense than all else, and the determination pumping through his veins was thicker than all else. His goal was to find her. His goal was to hunt and kill whosoever had touched her. His goal was to save her from their wretched clutches. Those goals. He was pretty close to it, judging by the numerous scents that was beginning to disgustingly whip against his nose. That was when we knew it. The scent-hiding spray must have started to wear off. Shifting back to human form whilst continuing to run as fast as ever, Damon took a long whiff of every single scent he could and did his best to single out one specific one, the scent of his mate. And it didn't take long to distinguish it among every other. Upon finding it, adrenaline flooded through his body like a shot of electricity, pumping him faster, pushing him harder towards her. Saving her was a must, and if even a single hair has left her head, they all better pray that he doesn't get a hold of them. He'd shatter them all into pieces slowly, dangerously, until the only thing left of them was merely blood. It was when he was a short distance away from his destination that he realized that he had already taken this particular path already. A few months ago, he had came to this place and slaughtered all that breathed air, simply because they had dared to hurt the woman that belonged to him. Who would have thought that they'd use it as a base? The nerve of those filthy rogues. Alpha, I think we'll soon arrive. I could vaguely smell both hunters and rogues. A lot of them. It doesn't seem like they're concentrated at one spot, Jason informed, a bit of worry painting his face. They're probably surrounding their hideout. Delirious, another high-ranking werewolf, added as he ran closely behind Jason. How should we proceed? We're going in head-on, Damon commanded, his hazel orbs finally locking on the familiar tall building. With so much of them in one spot, we won't be able to sneak attack. They'll spot us the second we leave the forest. Understood. They both nodded in an understanding and simultaneously pulled to a stop. Jason held up his hand, and the army of wolves who were thundering behind him quickly skidded to a stop. Our top priority is to create a path for the Alpha to rescue the Luna, which means that you can kill as many of these traitors as possible. However, his eyes became somewhat stern. I want no casualties from our side. Got it? With a chorus of loud, earth-shattering howls, the wolves leaped forward and headed straight for their target. As soon as the enemy spotted them, there was an immediate sound of a siren of some sort, and before long, all their available men relocated to the front of the building, meeting Damon's army in the middle. One side was immensely large, while the other lacked a few hundred wolves. Damon was definitely the one at a disadvantage, but nonetheless they'd attack. They had to, for Sarah's sake. Damon pursed his lips. This was it. The all-out battle that decided who would reign over all. Whether it be hunters, rogues, or werewolves. And without a doubt, today would definitely mark another victory. For he'd save Sarah at all costs, and then he'd kill every single one of these traitors. His lips slipped apart, and a chunk of air escaped them as Damon's voice boomed through the forest. Attack! Then, the battle begun. Teeth were bared, claws were elongated, guns were loaded, and arrows were aimed. Within 15 measly minutes, over 100 were on the floor. Within 30 minutes, over 300 lives were lost. And within an hour and 30 minutes, one unfortunate side had lost too many. Sir! A hunter ran through the battlefield and pushed open the double doors that led to hundreds of cells. Things are getting hectic. Kevin, who was sitting quietly with his thin lips pressed tightly together, snapped his head in the newcomer's direction and slitted his brown eyes menacingly. You think we don't know that? He boomed, the longest ringlet of his blonde hair falling lightly over his left eye. Get the fuck out there and protect this fucking place! He pointed an angrily trembling finger at the door. The man shook in his place and dropped his head. Well, that's... His lips wobbled as he struggled to deliver urgent news to his superior. Kevin scoffed at his obvious fear and lowered his hand. This freak wasn't even worth his anger. But sadly, Kevin had assessed him wrongly. It wasn't him that he feared. It was the raging wolf outside who was now closing in on their fortress. That wolf was none other than Damon. The man gulped. Almost all of our men have perished. It looks like we're losing. He finally started spitting out his words. And the Alpha King is bulldozing his way through the battle. He's heading straight for... Before he could finish, a hand rammed through his chest and its palm laid the man's heart. His lips parted and loads of blood evicted from his throat as the life slowly left him. Then, the hand retreated from his chest and shoved the lifeless body to the side, the figure of his killer now on full display. You fucking shit! Kevin shuffled backwards against the concrete floor, his eyes zooming in on a bloodied Damon who was cracking his fingers threateningly, his deadly gaze pinned on no one but him. Good to see you too. With that, Damon rushed forward. Kevin didn't bother saving an ounce of his pride. He pulled his gun from his holster and quickly turned around fully before taking off towards the cell that Sarah was being kept in, while occasionally sending poorly aimed bullets in Damon's direction. Sadly for him, Damon didn't even have to stress himself too much to evade those bullets. Kevin was obviously scared to the point where his skills in shooting had dulled immensely. He didn't expect Damon to reach this far so fast. Yes, there was a chance for his plan to go south, which is why he prepared a plan B that included using Sarah as a hostage. But if he didn't make it to her, plan B wouldn't even be able to commence. With shaking hands, he hunted through the strapped bag he had on his shoulder and grabbed the first smoke bomb he found before throwing it in Damon's direction. "That ought to bring you mutt down," he grinned, slowing down slightly so he could stare gloatingly at the smoke screen he had successfully created. That smoke bomb also had traces of wolfsbane, so Kevin was certain that no werewolf would be able to continue moving at full speed after having inhaling it. Not even Damon. This was his chance to spring towards her cell. But again, he had underestimated his enemy. Not exactly. Damon leaped through the smoke in an instant and charged forward before Kevin could even absorb the sight of him unaffected. He grabbed hold of his neck and slammed him against the wall, causing blood to immediately rise up his throat. "Where is she?" Kevin coughed, blinking rapidly to get rid of the blurriness that had started to envelop his vision. "Oh, you can't smell her? Then Maxim must have hidden her scent. I guess he isn't that dumb after all." He was speaking boldly, and even his expression seemed somewhat stoic. "I'm the one who's giving you 5 seconds to let him go before I sink my claws into her neck." A gleeful voice split through the air. Made it to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 66. Who dies? "I'm the one who's giving you 5 seconds to let him go before I sink my claws into her neck." A gleeful voice split through the air, sending dangerous chills down Damon's spine. Her neck? He wasn't talking about Sarah, was he? Slowly, Damon turned his head towards Maxim, who was being followed by 2 black rogue wolves, one already shifted, while the other was still in human form. Upon seeing the sight of Maxim holding his battered mate, Damon's hand unintentionally loosened around Kevin's neck. Kevin immediately used the chance to pluck each of his fingers from around his neck and swiftly escape his clutches, running over to Maxim's side. What did you do to her?" His shocked eyes rolled up and down her body over and over again, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Her arms were wrapped around her stomach, and blood was seeping from bruises sprawled over her body. From the way she was close to tumbling over backway, she probably couldn't even stand on her own. "What the fuck did you do?" Damon repeated, his voice low and threatening as his hands returned to his side. "It seems like you don't realize who's currently in shit right now. It's not me, nor you. It's this little human who has absolutely nothing to do with this, and..." Maxim ran his nails along her neck. "The helpless kid growing inside her. You won't let them die, will you? That's if the kid isn't dead already." Damon's eyes twinkled with confusion. Kid? You hadn't realized?" He rose a brow, and then a few seconds passed before he burst out laughing. "Oh my, I think I've ruined the surprise!" Damon's hands that were balled into a fist slowly unfurled as a shock coursed through him. Now that he thought of it, pregnancy could have been the only reason why he felt her scent had gotten stronger. Why didn't he think of it? Why had he been so oblivious? If he had realized it sooner, then he would have postponed this whole battle to a later date, and then maybe this all wouldn't have happened. Maybe all this could have turned out differently. But he was too rash. This was his fault, his and his alone. It was definitely entertaining to see you struggle to live. But what will you do now? It's either you let them both die, or you give up now. Which will it be? Maxim smiled from ear to ear. It was obvious that he was enjoying Damon's turmoil. Come on, it isn't that hard to choose, is it? I thought alphas treasured their bloodlines over everything else. And out of respect for at least coming this far, I'll at least let the child live. Besides, I wasn't even planning on hurting your mate this badly, but she was hell-bent on not rejecting you. This is your fault for not teaching her how to behave. Damon stared at him, for a long while at that. His long stare was simply for the sole reason of displaying his sheer anger, rather than to scout a decision. He needed not to think before he acted, because there was absolutely nothing to think about. Because it was the only thing he could do in this situation. Fine. You win. He slowly held his hands up in surrender. Al. No! A soft, repetitive whisper cut him off. I'm fine, just... Sarah swallowed the metallic liquid in her mouth as she struggled to speak. The view around her was blurry, and her whole body was burning with immense pain. It was a mystery how she even managed to release a few words. Just kill them all. Damon knew exactly who had said those words, yet his eyes didn't move towards her. This was his choice to make, whether to die or to save her. Obviously, there was a 50% chance that Maxim would still kill her even after he perished. But he'd take the risk anyway, if it meant that he'd at least die with a little hope left in him. Hope that you would still be alive after he died. I'll let you do what you want, he continued. But you better kill me on spot, because the moment I get my hands on you will be the moment you die. Maxim quickly made a gesture with his chin, and within an instant, one of his lackeys pinned Damon to the ground and sunk his large wolf teeth into his neck enough to draw blood. One slight movement from either of them, and his life could be in grave danger. Maxim cheerfully shoved Sarah in Kevin's direction, and he quickly shuffled to point his gun at her head. Anyone could tell that he was still ruffled by his near-death experience a little while ago. He was making it pretty obvious. When I give you the go, kill them both, he said, his words addressing both Kevin and the rogue. Kevin's eyes widened. But, do you want to die? Maxim snapped. Shoot when I say so, or you'll be the one with a bullet in your skull. Reluctantly, Kevin nodded. He had no one to back him at the moment, so his authority basically laid beneath Maxim's feet now. It was either he allowed himself to be killed, or he followed his lead. The latter was his best choice in this case. I thought you said you keep her alive, Damon growled from the floor, his hate-filled eyes glaring up at an elated Maxim. I said I'd keep the kid alive, not her. Ain't that right? But sadly, if the mother dies, the child dies as well. It's above my capabilities to say— You fucking— What the fuck is going on? Katie's voice came first, and then her figure slowly emerged from behind the wall before entering through the door. All eyes turned to her furious form. She had struggled her way through the battlefield after hearing a few gunshots from the inside. She knew that something bad had happened, but she didn't expect to see this. You said you wouldn't hurt them. You said you'd only make her reject him. It doesn't look like that's what you're doing. Her eyes were as fierce as a tiger's, and she pulled back her arrow and lifted her chin. This arrow was laced with wolfsbane, so you better tell me what the hell is going on. She wasn't going according to plan, Maxim explained as he paced calmly through the cramped space. He didn't seem all that worried over her sudden appearance, but Katie didn't take notice of that. So we had to make some drastic measures. Drastic measures? She looks like she's about to fucking fall over. Release them and let's leave this place quickly. The reinforcements have already arrived and we are bound to lose. No, we've already lost. So what if we're losing? I want my revenge no matter what, and I will have it. Stop going on and on about a stupid revenge. How will you get your revenge when you're dead? Let them go and leave this place, or what? Will you shoot me if I do this? He swiftly grabbed Kevin's spare gun from his left holster and shot Damon once in the thigh and once more in his shoulder. Damon bit down on his cheeks. Despite the pain that ravaged him, he didn't let Maxim have the pleasure of hearing a single squeak escape him. But the wolfsbane in the bullets, plus the amount he inhaled not too long ago, was gradually making him weaker. Because of it, his wounds wouldn't heal as fast as before, so the pain was more harder to bear than ever. I seriously will shoot you, Katie warned. Or this. Ignoring her warning, Maxim then turned his body in Sarah's direction and aimed the loaded gun at her head. In turn, Kevin bit his bottom lip nervously, while Katie's eyes widened and Damon's body stiffened in dread. Maxim grinned. The abounding fear tainting the air around him was what he had been yearning for. It was what he lived for, especially Damon's. Stop this madness. You won't be able to get out of here alive, Damon snared. Who cares? I told you, didn't I? All I want is revenge. I want to see your face when I blow her brains out. He cackled as his index finger tortuously moved towards the trigger. Katie tightened her hold on the arrow, and before anything else could happen, she pulled it further backwards, and with a deep breath, she released it into the air. Everyone expected it to hit, but unfortunately, it didn't. Before the arrow could pierce him, Maxim lowered the gun swiftly, grabbed the rogue he brought with him, and pulled him in front of him, causing the arrow to proceed through his heart instead. Then, he lifted the gun once again, rested it atop the rogue's shoulder, and without an ounce of hesitance, he pulled the trigger thrice in total, 1 bullet in her shoulder, and 2 in her chest. I bet you thought I wasn't this good with guns, he laughed as he threw his lifeless comrade aside. Surprise, surprise! A low gasp escaped Sarah's bruised lips, while on the other hand, Damon's face remained as emotionless as ever. He felt absolutely no ounce of remorse for that traitor. His mind was solely focused on finding a way out of this. At least a way out for Sarah. But the solution wasn't coming to him. In fact, there could be very well no solution at all. But Damon couldn't accept that fate. They shouldn't die. They couldn't die. And he'd make sure of it, even if he had to stoop lower than he ever did before. I'll do whatever you want me to do without a fight, Damon squeezed out. I'll call off my army, hand the throne to you, give you all the riches I own. Anything. For the first time in his life, Damon was pleading. But just let her live. Maxim shook his head while licking his lips. All I need is for you and everyone related to you to die. Now, boys, get ready to kill these fuckers when I tell you to. Though death awaited him whenever he stepped out of this place, Maxim was still as hysterical and gleeful as ever. He was finally getting what he wanted. Revenge on the man who had locked him up for years. He had waited a long time for this very moment, and now he'd get to watch Damon die before his eyes. Today would definitely be the best day of his life. With his grin still set on his lips, he opened his mouth and got ready to voice the words that would make him the happiest man alive. But in the midst of his euphoria, Katie, who was barely breathing on the floor, locked her fingers around her bow. Pain erupted in her shoulder and chest, but nonetheless, she sucked in a heap of air and reached behind her, pulling out the last arrow she had stacked in her bag. She set the bow and arrow in place before lifting it lightly off the floor. Then, she shifted her eyes to the scene before her and was ready to aim. But sadly, she was not even sure what she should have been aiming at. Whether at the rogue holding Damon hostage, the hunter pointing a gun to Sarah's head, or Maxim. If she saved Sarah, then she probably wouldn't even make it out of here alive, since she'd literally have 3 enemies to evade. If she'd saved Damon, then he probably wouldn't even be able to save Sarah, nor himself, considering the gunshot wounds he had and the deep bite mark in his neck. And if she tried to kill Maxim in one blow, there was still no telling what his lackeys would do to avenge him. So then, what was she to do? Who should be left to die? And who should she save? But she didn't get enough time to make a final decision, because within a few seconds, Maxim had shouted his last command. "Kill them!" In the spur of the moment, Katie quickly shoved her thoughts aside and released the last arrow in someone's direction. Made It to the Ruthless Alpha King. Written by Ba Room. Narrated by Dante Mohammed. Chapter 67. How It All Went Down, Part 1. Kill them! In the spur of the moment, Katie quickly shoved her thoughts aside and released the last arrow in Sarah's direction. But unfortunately, before she could even see where her decision would take them, the life slowly left her blue eyes, and she fell flat against the floor. Following her sudden death, the shifted wolf latched its teeth into Damon's skin, drawing lines and lines of blood through the deeply punctured wounds. With no one there to stop the flow of blood, Damon's sheer will was only able to keep him conscious for so long. And the sad part was the fact that if he even moved an inch while trying to defend himself, he'd only make it worse, or even end up aiding his own death. On the other hand, Kevin staggered back and gripped his chest when the arrow pierced through him and caused wolfsbane to circulate through his veins. Pain like no other scourged his being, and in response, his body weakened drastically, and agony spread throughout every limb he possessed. Before long, he was on the floor, writhing and trembling until his whole body suddenly stilled, signaling that he, too, had lost his life. It was astounding how a mere human like him could even last a whole minute while being infested by wolfsbane. In other cases, the human would have died almost in the blink of an eye. In the interim, 2 bloodied figures slipped through the door with heaving chests and stood silently as they accessed the scene before them in disbelief. One being Delirious and the other being Jason. They had worked their way through the war and had now come in hopes of helping Damon dispose of the trash. But the scene was sadly opposite to what they both expected to see. Delirious remained calm and poised as he stared, while Jason's eyes bulged out of their sockets, zooming in on Damon's unconscious form. Meanwhile, Jason's vision reddened with rage, and he rushed forward with no sort of reasoning. Sarah suddenly dropped to her knees, struggling to differentiate between what was real and what was not. Everything just seemed like one big bloodbath before her eyes, but even so, her eyes remained trained on an unmoving Damon. Beside her, Maxim was now panicking. His frantic eyes looked over the room hurriedly as they searched for something, or rather someone, that could change the outcome of this whole war. In this case, Sarah was obviously the easiest victim and the most valuable person to use as leverage. But Sarah didn't even bat an eye at him, despite knowing full well of that very fact. Her full attention was focused on one man, and that was Damon. Her whole body convulsed in anguish, and salty tears sprang forth in her eyes. Slowly, she creeped across the cold floor, and as she did so, even the small pebbles jutting into her wounds went completely unnoticed by her. Unlike before, she currently wasn't feeling physical pain, but rather an emotional one. Hesitantly, she reached for Damon's pale body, desperately wanting to confirm whether he was truly lying unconscious before her, or if all this was one horrible nightmare. The wolf biting into his neck growled as her fingers neared her mate's body. That was clearly his way of telling her to cease her movements, but nonetheless, Sarah ignored yet another enemy and continued to reach for her mate. Swiftly, the wolf released Damon's limp body, and an earth-shattering growl erupted up its throat before its teeth swooped in, attempting to rip her hand from her body. However, in split seconds, Jason's wolf form had tackled him to the floor in a fit of rage. Teeth clanked together, claws ripped through flesh, and threatening growls thundered from each side. The moment Jason lost all reasoning and rushed forward, he only had one goal in mind, and that was to kill the werewolf who had done what he previously thought was impossible: hurt his best friend. He'd skin him alive and chomp on his flesh till nothing remained. That was a promise. Similarly, Delirious struck his own target as well, Maxim. Though sadly, the outcome of a battle between two with totally different skill level was already set before the fight even began. But Jason was too out of it to realize that while he had a 20% chance of winning a fight with Maxim, Delirious has a clear 1%, if not less. Without a doubt, Delirious was sure of his defeat, but despite that, he'd try his best to hold out and protect the Luna until Jason successfully got his revenge. That was his task, the very last one he'd get to execute. And so, his very first attack was a full-on strike for the neck, which Maxim unfortunately managed to evade. "Luna!" he called out to Sarah as he tried to effectively oppress his enemies. "There's a broken window in the room before you. Get out of this place and leave through the woods around back. We will take care of the things here, then take the Alpha to safety." Delirious's plan was to get her out of harm's way, and if that happened, they'd have less people to protect. The low-ranked wolf Jason was fighting would inevitably be defeated, and then afterwards, Jason would be able to leave with the Alpha while he continued to hold Maxim back. That was the best and only option they had. But Sarah wasn't making things easy, since she didn't make any move to leave Damon's side. "You must hurry," he urged, wincing when he received an unavoidable strike to his torso. "Leave?" Sarah immediately shook her head, her small hands cupping Damon's cheeks. "I won't leave him here. He needs help now." Her body was at its limit. You could say all her limbs were about to give out. But if she wanted to, she could still make it outside. But the truth was, she didn't want to. Not when Damon was in such a condition. His eyes were long shut and his whole body was limp. If he stayed here much longer, he'd most definitely die. If she was ever going to leave, then it'd be with him or not at all. This person before her looked nothing like the Damon she knew. The one who promised that he'd be back. The one who had never even uttered an apology until a few weeks ago. The one who was 100% sure he wouldn't lose a fight. The one who's the alpha of all alphas. Who'd believe it? The mighty Damon Callista was lying before her on the brink of dying. And the worst thing was, this was her fault completely. In fact, everything has always been her fault from the beginning. If he hadn't gotten mixed up with Alexis, there'd be no bad blood between them, and ultimately, she wouldn't have tried to devise plans in order to get Damon to kick her out. Secondly, If she hadn't been so gullible and stupid, she wouldn't have managed to unintentionally release a rogue king who had been locked up for years. Thirdly, if she hadn't been his mate or if she didn't exist at all, then Damon would have probably gotten back with Katie. Maxim would still be in the basement, and no one would have suffered because of her mistakes. In short, this whole thing wouldn't have happened. All of this was Wally her fault. Everything. And that realization made her feel as if her body was literally going to split in two. But despite her heavy remorse, she knew that what has already been done could not be changed. What she needed to do now was to get her act together and do whatever she could before it all becomes beyond help. And that meant no fear, no hesitance, no Sarah. With that resolve, she pressed one of her palms to the floor, and then slowly, she tried to stand. Her legs trembled and rocked, but she managed to force herself to her feet despite that. From this moment on, she'd do everything in her power to save both Damon and this baby. And nothing would stop her. Not even her own pent-up body. As tears continued to flow from her eyes despite her constant swiping, she reached for Damon's arm and threw it over her shoulder. She wrapped her arms around his waist, and with all the energy she could possibly exert, she pulled him up. Well, tried to. To her dismay, his bulky body didn't budge one bit. She was too weak to lift him. In fact, she was too weak to do anything at all. That fact must have tumbled down a few bricks of confidence, because Sarah's eyelids visibly drooped under her small shoulders slumped. If she couldn't get him up, then they were all as good as dead. Panicking once again, she turned to the only two persons she could. "He needs a doctor! Jess!" She held both her tongue and her breath when her eyes spotted Delirius's body sprawled out on the floor. Unfortunately, not much long ago, he had been taken down after several spontaneous blows to his chest. Evasion was the one and only tactic he could use when up against someone like Maxim, but the moment he failed to evade one attack, Delirius easily found himself on the floor, unable to move nor breathe. And now, Jason was occupied with fighting against two strong wolves. One wrong move could mean his very death. "Damon!" Turning back towards Damon, she tried slapping his cheeks, but even then, there remained no physical response to her actions. "Damon, wake up!" As panic and desperation continued to infest her like a disease, Sarah frantically switched positions, moving to his feet where she latched her fingers around his ankle and pulled. Each hard pull only brought him a few inches closer to the door, but it was better than nothing in Sarah's eyes. She could hardly pull him across the floor, so bringing him over to the window was definitely a mission impossible. Then again, if she were to pull him through the door, the enemy wolves would definitely claw their throats out without delay. And if, for instance, she managed to evade them, how would she get him to the infirmary? She could not possibly drag him all the way back to his pack. That was absolutely impossible. But it's sad to say that that was exactly what Sarah was thinking of doing. The tingles that they shared were the only source of reassurance that there still was a chance to save him. Whether by dragging him or by carrying him, she'd get him out, even if it's the last thing she does. But in the middle of her internal conflicts, a hand wrapped around her wrist, stopping her from pulling him further. Slowly, Sarah guided her frightened gaze upwards, locking eyes with a pair of red ones. Her whole body stiffened. "Let's get back to it, shall we?" he grinned. "It's time I got rid of your sorry ass." Sarah tried in vain to pull her wrist out of his hold, but Maxim's grin only widened as he forcefully pulled her to her feet as if she were air. It took a while to finally comprehend her situation, and when she did, her eyes dreadfully swerved past him and to Jason, who was fighting in her and Damon's stead. He looked tired, worn out to the brim and utterly half-dead. She wanted to help him, she honestly did, but her uselessness was higher than anyone else's. She couldn't even protect herself, much less him. "It's either you have a whole bunch of luck." Maxim relocated his hand from her wrist and to her hair, yanking at the stand as his lips curled in anger. "Or I have an endless supply of bad luck. Which is it, Sarah?" He drawled out her name with as much malice as he could muster. Even Sarah was taken aback by it. The bloodlust in his eyes was definitely greater than before, which meant he was out for blood. Her blood. Once again, desperation had her looking to Jason for help. She nearly cried in relief when her eyes caught sight of Jason pinning the wolf he was fighting to the floor. From the looks of it, he was either dead or unconscious. Her pleading eyes silently called out to Jason, and thankfully, he didn't wait much time before sprinting in her direction. Sarah's worry for her life toned down a few notches because she was certain that he would catch Maxim by surprise. As Jason was careful with every sound his feet made, even he himself thought the same. But not everything was as easy as it seemed. Maxim was damn well prepared. Prepared to slam the life right out of him, that is. Before Jason could even graze his skin, he was grabbed by the neck and slammed into the floor with a bone-crushing force. Sarah felt the ground shake beneath her feet from the impact, and with dread-filled eyes, she followed every movement of Jason's body as Maxim began pounding him into the floor again and again and again. "You're getting boring, mutt. Die!" Maxim grinned wickedly when blood started to pool beneath Jason's body. Sarah stepped back as the color left her face and her head began filling with rampant thoughts. Worst case scenario, Jason would end up dead. She'd easily be killed with just the tip of Maxim's finger, and Damon would bleed until he eventually died as well. The thought sent ruffling chills up her spine, and Sarah found herself unable to even stand still in one spot. Tearing her guilty gaze away from Jason, she took a glance at Damon, who was lying right where she left him. From the small distance, she could easily tell that his breaths were getting shorter and shorter. Sooner or later, he'd stop breathing completely, which meant he needed to get out of here and fast. But Jason needed help too. If Maxim kept up with his maniacal actions, he'd definitely die by his hands as well. Who's to say he wouldn't be dying a useless death? And even if she decided to ditch him and leave with Damon, which he certainly wouldn't, there's no telling what danger would catch up with her later. So although fear was at its highest peak within every vein in her body, she knew that the best option she had was to take into her own hands, to try and fend Maxim off herself. Not while depending on Jason, not while depending on Damon, and not while depending on sheer luck. This time, she'd only depend on herself, not that she really had a chance. And as she looked over the bloodied building and swept her guilty gaze over her allies' pent-up bodies, she felt a heap of courage manifest into being, a level of courage that had never graced her before now. It was better to die trying. That much she knew and understood, if not for herself, then for those who had perished while protecting her. And so, as Maxim continued to slam the life out of Jason, Sarah's eyes darted in all directions, searching desperately for something of use. In less than a second, her eyes caught sight of the perfect weapon a few feet away from her. Without further ado, she dragged her aching feet over to an unmoving Kevin, and with shaking fingers, she pulled the bloodied arrow from his chest after much effort. Taking a deep breath, she turned back towards Maxim and slowly moved in his direction. Maxim didn't pay much attention to her. Even when he heard movements behind him, he didn't think much of it. Why? Simply because Sarah was a mere weakling, a human. One wouldn't expect someone like her to try anything, but that was where he was wrong. She could, and she did.